Sports have highs and lows. There's always a winner. There's always someone who lost. And that normal, healthy friction comes in. That makes the game exciting. That pushes and challenges gamers to master the moves, to craft their team and win. That is the intrinsic motivation that we all have, but also the highlights, the moments of joy that happen. That is the gold mine. How do we amplify it? How do we also aid the friction points? If someone is losing, why? What do they need to master? What do they need to know? So all of that comes in handy in how we look at games and how we help gamers progress and improve and, try one more time and win.
Hi everyone, welcome to Design Drawers, where we interview the most forward-thinking and innovative creatives on the planet to inspire and help you to reach your full creative potential. In the episode, I chat with Liliia Mandrino, Director of Experience Design at EA Sports FIFA. And we learn about how to design for games. Games by itself are a very emotional product, just like automotive products are a very emotional product. And the design process is actually quite different to a maybe more utility-driven product, like a financial application, for example. So we're going to learn about that. We're also going to learn about multisensory design and the importance of telling a narrative when it comes to the user journey. Actually something that we can learn from designing for such emotional products and see how we can apply that to maybe our own projects. And I've been a former gamer myself when it comes to FIFA and really played a big role in my teenage years. So I really hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. All right, so I'm here with Liliia Mandrino, Director of Experience Design at EA Sports FIFA. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Sebastian, for having me on the podcast. Pleasure to connect with you as well.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about your role at EA Games FIFA, how to design games, how do you structure the process when it comes to that, what is different to maybe usual design process or usually UX UI design job that people can refer to, and how does this maybe also changing when it comes to designing for games? It's a highly emotional product. We talked a little bit about already before the recording about how emotional the audience is about the product. In this case, the game, and so super interesting. I think what would be really helpful for the audience, Liliia, if you could give a bit of an outline about your background, because work at EA Games FIFA, but you have been doing a lot of things in the past.
I'm originally from Ukraine, where I spent 27 years of my life, graduated from a university with a dual degree in psychology in German language and literature. Unfortunately, there is very little I remember with German language because haven't applied it actively in the past many, many years. Yes, but that's been a passion of mine. Ukraine is also where I got my first job at Template Monster. It was a small startup that actually grew into something very special and very successful. This is where I spent 8 years of working on creating websites. Back then, we also used Macromedia Flash, anything from highly lightweight CSS, HTML websites to software. Lots of interesting work that happened there and lots of growth for me as well. And I think when iPhone 4 or 3 entered the Ukrainian market, this is where I have been fascinated with mobile experiences. And between 2010 and 2014, I have been solely focusing on the mobile apps. And there was quite the journey really figuring that out. 2015 marks my move to the US. And ever since, I'm working within the experience design realm, helping medium to large size companies excel in experience design. And today I am leading experience design at EA Sports FIFA.
Yeah, a lot of, long journey going to different stations. I think not always looking at different sort of like areas, which is interesting. If you look at some of your past projects, was there any kind of particular project that you really, for the first time, you recognize the impact and maybe also positive change you can do as a designer when it comes about changing a product, influencing the sort of experience, or getting very positive feedback from customers later using the product? Is there any kind of project that kind of stood out from the past where the first time you recognize about the impact that you can actually have as a designer when it comes to having a positive impact?
Yes, I think everything we do at EA Sports FIFA, I think, has an enormous positive impact because we do unite people in a very divided world. We do unite communities through a common passion for sport, for football. I also think that games have been helping us, keeping the kids off the streets, or giving someone who can't participate in physical sports to experience what athletes are feeling on the pitch. That is definitely the highlight. Now, looking back several years ago, I've been observing how people struggle with goal setting, achieving goals, being consistent. And I had this idea for a framework that will help people reach their goals, reach their potential. And the idea is quite simple. It's just one thing. The mobile app is called Jot. And this is something that I've been working on before joining FIFA. It's on pause now, but I think at some point I will come back because I think there is a responsibility that we designers have in helping people overcome obstacles, whether it's physical, emotional, and I think habit formation hasn't been something people are really good at.
It's tough. Yeah.
It is. And I think we do tend to overcomplicate things in many ways. Let's say you decide to start a new diet. People buy suddenly the 2-week complex programs. It's really challenging to stick with, right? We all have very limited amount of time. We not always have time to prep or even the workouts. Let's say you have committed yourself to 3 workouts a week. How do you stick to that? And in my mind, it is all about simple steps every single day. You just do the workout, just one thing, and that is your accomplishment for today. You eat something healthy, and that is just one thing for your day. And you just repeat it 1,000 times, and you will end up in a better place. It's been definitely something that I've thought about for quite some time because I know I'm good at goal setting, but I have seen people fail and stop and pause and really feel bad about that. And I think it's about simplification. How do you simplify your goals? How do you simplify your life? But more so, I think it's about the consistency.
I couldn't agree more, and I think it's so nice that you share this. I think it's the same in my personal life. I try to kind of like change things with like small habits, and I think that's how I do them. And there are plenty of books of it. I think I'm gonna name the same books like you. Basically about like how do you create habits, and a common problem is that people set too high, try to make too big steps, right? So they try to do it all at once. Like you become vegan from the next day to the other, or you change your diet from next day to the other, or you're gonna go now. You start a new week and you set yourself the goal of going to the gym 3 times per week. And maybe you should start with 1 time, and again slowly build it up, right? And always focus on one thing at a time. And I think as designers, in terms of like how we design the products, how we design the flows, how do we shape the digital experience, we can influence that, right? It's also about teaming up with other disciplines. I think there's great power in designer coming together with science, coming together with bringing in aspects of psychology and shaping behaviors. On the podcast, I had many episodes on sort of behavior design, and I think it's a great topic where designers can actually have a lot of things, specifically these days, because there's so much noise, so much distraction. People have a hard time kind of controlling themselves or working towards a certain purpose. So it's great that you point that out. So if you think about the design process of games, how is that differentiating towards the design process of, let's say, consumer interfaces? Specifically, I mean, if we're talking about the UX UI that you're specifically focusing when it comes to games, can you talk a little bit more about how does that change
Mhm.
maybe to a usual design process? If you think about like a
Yes,
mobile application, for example.
for sure. I thought about that and spending many years in product design, then coming to the games. I think there is the biggest difference is actually the impact between games and the product, as well
Mhm.
as the length of the engagement. When people open their mobile app, normally they want to accomplish a task
Mhm.
or book a flight, start the workout and finish it. They want to book a property. And it's more so incremental and not as lasting connection with the experience. While with games, people do tend to engage for a longer time, for
Mhm.
longer
Mhm.
sessions. They
Interesting.
want to indulge in that. And so I think that is the biggest difference that also dictates some of the processes that differ from the product designer games. Now, the games are also highly emotional. They immerse you. They do
Mhm.
fast forward your consciousness into the future. And so I think the understanding of that dictates the multisensory approach to how do we design games. And on the other hand, the banking app might not need to spark as much emotion, does not have to immerse you because
Yeah.
that's a transaction that you need to complete safely and quickly. In games, it's the opposite. You want to indulge in that immersion.
100%. I think you framed it really great. I think it's a very emotional product, and it's not about sort of, I mean, in most applications that people design, we're talking to, the designers here, it's very often about doing a task, but doing it also quickly. Of course, most applications have the goal of keeping people longer in the app. Yeah, but there are a lot of applications as SaaS products, etc. They're utility driven, right? They have a certain task that, and people value if a consumer experience is kind of quick, right? Of course, there's social application, entertainment. It's all that context. In a recent episode, I talked to one of the lead designers at Netflix, for example, right? It's also an entertainment product. You also have a longer duration with the product. Is also different to, I think, most UX UI design projects. I also see great overlap between what you just said and the automotive space, actually, right?
Really,
Because
how so?
that's also a very emotional product, right? It's about, like you said, you have to think about the sound, right? In when it comes to the game design, you have to think about, like, you can have people actually spend time in your application, and it's about emotionalizing that journey from. And I know it myself. I was big on FIFA all my life, especially in the teenage years of mine. And that sort of journey where you select a team and you kind of get ready for the game. That's sort of like a process people also really enjoy, right? And kind of making that great. It's not about speed so much. And when it comes to automotive experiences, it's similar in the way that the product is highly emotional. So the interface is like wants to capture that emotional aspect, right? It
Mhm.
wants to give you that sort of scene and a certain vibe in the interface that I think is very similar to how you try to do it with FIFA, right? Where you may
Mhm.
want to create anticipation, for example, right? So kind of like, seeing the stadium already when you come in, sort of that sort of anticipation towards the game, and that joy of anticipation, right?
It is.
And
It
and
is.
and then sort of even the game itself, you can emotionalize that to the interface design, right? I mean, it's similar if you think about sort of a dashboard where, if you drive a car, like if you specifically, for example, if it's a sport car, you try to make that experience that the user has even more emotional to the digital layer. And I see great similarity here between game space and FIFA and maybe the automotive space, if that makes sense.
For sure. And I do think it is about really understanding the highs and the lows and designing around those hot spots. That is what makes games in general are really enjoyable, satisfying experiences.
Can you outline this a little bit for audience who may not understand, like what you mean with high and lows?
Well, I think sports, for example, sports have highs and lows. There's always a winner. There's always someone who lost. And that normal, healthy friction comes in that makes the game exciting. That pushes and challenges gamers to master the moves, to craft their team and win. That is the intrinsic motivation that we all have, but also the highlights, the moments of joy that happen. That is the gold mine. How do we amplify it? How do we also aid the friction points? If someone is losing, why? What do they need to master? What do they need to know? So all of that comes in handy in how we look at games and how we help gamers progress and improve and, try one more time and win.
It's interesting, right? I mean, if you design a usual application, you kind of, by design, you try to avoid any lows, right? you really try that there is no major low in your application, right? With games, you cannot control it. I mean, sometimes you're going to lose. That's part of the thrill, right?
It is a part of it.
Yes. So, and then sort of thinking about, how can you like work with the motivation now and keep people engaged and sort of design that journey. Yeah. You also talked about multisensory experiences already, and I think this kind of ties together to creativity. I think we already started to touch on that. I think people, and I mean, I can just talk about the automotive space because I worked in that space for a long time. So you have a lot more, let's say, creativity than you may have on other products when it comes to the execution of the design, just due to the emotional aspect, but just also to the richness and the product and the use cases and the fact that it's may not just purely utility driven. Can you talk a bit about that, the creativity that game design or game interface design allows for designers?
Yes, and I think it's not just allowing games interfaces demand that creativity, because in many ways gamers expect it. They do want to experience the very best. And if you don't deliver, someone else will. And so it's not even an option. We must innovate, we must approach it creatively so our gamers can enjoy it and, really immerse themselves into the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting if I think about game interface design, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think there's always there's the sort of atmosphere of the game you already try to bring to the menu, for example, right? So there is a certain aspect of sort of the 3D game itself, the game design itself, the actual where people spend a lot of time, and then that whole journey towards that game, which is as important. When I was talking to one of the designers at Netflix, I've been talking to other designers working in the entertainment space, like Disney, etc. They also say like the journey towards deciding the movie and then actually watching the movie is for them like they look at it as important as the actual watching the movie, right? And I think it's similar probably in the game space, right?
Yes, and I think that's actually a good point because your experience with the game doesn't start when you press the
Start.
start button
Yeah.
on the screen. It's when you pick up the controller, when
Yeah.
you open PlayStation or Xbox or Stadia or Steam. That is the moment when the experience starts. And so we have to be very, very careful so that experience isn't exhausting and daunting to the gamer by the time they land into the menu or a hub. It's still an enjoyable anticipation of the fun that's yet to come, and I think that is important.
You could say the game starts right there, right?
Yeah,
Sort of, right?
absolutely, yes.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, some games do this, right? Some games, if you open them for the first time, I know, for example, some racing games, for example, right? If you start the game for the first time, you're immediately in the race.
Mm-hmm.
You're not even about selecting anything. They just want to get you into the game as quick as possible, right?
That's right. That's
And
right.
usually they make the bot so easy that you always win. So you have a positive moment right away. I don't know if that's a trick or what's behind that, but usually it's very often basically that way, just to get people into the game, kind of like experience it, and then you can do set up like your race car and the menu and everything.
Yeah, and it is another trick. It is the wise way to teach gamers how to engage with the game.
Yeah.
It's teaching by doing and
Yes.
learning by doing, and there is no better way
Than playing the actual game. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So with your work and sort of like UX UI designers, for example, in a context like EA games, but also in general, maybe you can help the audience a little bit to understand, how that process usually works when there is, of course, the menu design, there is the interface design, there is the user journey that has to be defined, but there are also aspects like the game itself, right? Like at what moment you may be doing the game, show information, how is this displayed? How do you usually are UX UI designers are looking at that whole process, from the kind of anticipation, the menus, to the actual game, and then also thinking about the journeys in the game? Or is this usually another discipline, like a game designer that thinks more about sort of that experience in the game? Can you talk maybe a little bit about the different disciplines of designs you may need to bring a good game together?
Yes. And I think this is definitely very signature to games that we have additive, important disciplines that help us create an experience that is beautiful, that's immersive, that's engaging and fun. And game design is the key partner in that. There are many creative decisions that have to happen that come from game design. UX is stepping in to make sure that it's connected, that the journey is crafted with continuity in mind. How does it connect with other experiences and other chapters within the game? And the game design is definitely a key partner in that process. Now, there are also areas where we have heavier emphasis on the UX, navigation, for example, UI. We definitely are working on how things come together. How can we design harmonious experience where there is balance of the visual acoustics, the story, the interactions that lead the gamer towards something. And I think in many ways this is very collaborative process. There are heavier emphasis on the visual parts of the experience. There are some areas that are more so heavily dependent on the game design, but because it's so complex, this dynamic shifts all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are maybe also new disciplines emerging. Sound design, I think, is probably, I think, like you said, to multisensory sound plays an important role as well.
It is
I
an
think
important part.
I think you notice it as a gamer, you notice it as much as you notice the change of interface. If there's a new version of like a game, you notice like the sound when you go to It's different to designing a mobile application again, because usually people have turned off the sound at their phone altogether, right? But in a gaming scenario, you usually do it on a television, and then sound is an important part of that. So there's a lot of signature in this as well.
Absolutely. I think everything, it's not just the reliance on the color change or the interaction, it is the haptics, it is the sound design, it is the motion, it's everything that's happening per a given second. All of that connects closely together. And to your point, yes, haven't seen people turning on their sound for notifications on the mobile phone, but gamers always appreciate a well-crafted audio support, whether it being music, a playlist, or little sound bites when the menu gets expressed, or when they navigate to the next level, or where it's the moment of celebration and achievement. All of these are quite important when we think about the game design.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. And could you mention any kind of common challenges? I mean, it doesn't have to refer to FIFA, but as you got so much experience in game design, or like designing games, UX, UI, the actual game, etc. What are sort of usual common challenges that you face in that process? Where these are some of the where you could say maybe these are some of the tricky things always to solve from a designer perspective, where you try to really emphasize that in the process.
I think the challenges, they tend to be very consistent, which is needing to challenge the tech limitations. Similarly, how we ended up with iPhones in our pockets, because there was someone who had a big vision, big enough to challenge the tech conventions and tech. And I think in games it is the same in many ways. I think games have inspired a more performant technology and hardware. On the other hand, it's also challenging conventions. Implementing a new interaction paradigm is not easy, but with a given homework and the benefit that it might provide, those are probably the challenges that anyone will face, not just the designer. I think tech partners or game design, anyone who is somewhat connected to the games. I think the technological advancements and the conventions that get to be redefined. We've seen it happening many times, with example being Destiny 2 moving towards the cursor-based navigation. And 5 years later, there are many more games that have approached the same, but that was new. That was new and a scary innovation.
Oh, this is very interesting. Like the modality as well, right? You have a controller. Again, very similar to automotive space, because you're not just doing something on your phone like an app, but you have a remote control, you have gesture, you have voice, you have direct touch. Sometimes you can just see information and not even interacting with it directly. That is very similar to the automotive space. And that the other thing that's interesting is, and again, similar to the auto space, the performance aspect that you pointed out. As the product is more emotional, that also means emotional design requires more performance, right? If you think about the animation you want to do in a menu, that requires some performance. Otherwise, it's not going to run smooth, right? And this is, again, very similar to the automotive space, because you have a certain sort of computer power in the car that you try to see how you can max sort of the experience out of the available hardware. Very similar to what you're pointing out with designing something for PlayStation, Xbox, etc., or computers, right? That's always a challenge. We already talked about the difference between designing an emotional product and designing a product that is more utility driven, like the financial app, like you pointed out. What also changes, I assume, is sort of the way you set KPIs and like test the product, because like maybe with the financial app, like you said, it's, getting it done as quick as possible. With the game, now you set yourself maybe like what emotional products also have, they have more cognitive load for the user to digest. Meaning, if you want to make it emotional, that also means the interface becomes richer, meaning also it maybe becomes, it is maybe not so utility driven, meaning if you're taking utility driven KPIs here, how quick can I find this menu, etc. You're automatically going to take away some of the creativity, basically, right? But I'm very curious about your learnings in the space. How do you bring together sort of usability driven KPIs, the aspect of cognitive load, and at the same time a very emotional interface that tells a story, that has a narrative, and where you may set yourself different goals in the testing, which are about like what emotion did the user feel, right? How like, like I assume there's going to be different KPIs in the testing.
Yes, and I that is a great question, but I think it is a little bit of a misconception that in emotional experiences you sacrifice the usability. In games, it is a requirement to connect both the form and the function. That is what is making it uniquely different. While I think the emotion gets sacrificed more so in product, because at times you do tend to race after the conversion and just the acquisition and things that are more so utilitarian.
Yeah.
And so I think even though the emotional aspect might be perceived as subjective, is quite measurable. How fast does it take to get from point A to point B? How do gamers respond going through this journey? How quickly they can understand highly complex and deep interfaces? How can they engage and be successful within that journey? So even though emotion tends to get misinterpreted as subjective, and it is to a point, it's quite measurable. And sometimes in UX, we also talk about the UX. Sometimes it's about a good math too. Expresses anything that's adding to the overall churn, or anything that's eating up your precious minutes. Do you really want to grind through a bunch of menus, or you want to get in and out?
Yeah. So when it comes to measuring the emotion, like you said, how are you usually doing that? Do you have sort of a group of test users, like FIFA gamers?
Yes, I probably won't be able to touch on the how, but I can tell you
Yeah.
that our gamers are telling us when we're doing well, and they're also telling us when we're not doing well. And that is what we really love about that. It's quite an engaged community. They care,
Yeah.
they enjoy, they celebrate things that, allow them to feel something. And of course, in any experience, we're never done. There's more to do, and there's more to really refine and transform and innovate.
Oh, absolutely. Talking about that, you said like there's more to design, looking a little bit into the future of gaming. It's an interesting space right now. We already talked a little bit before the recording about everything that is going on in the space, about metaverse, about NFTs, about augmented reality, and all the technologies that coming into place. Generally speaking, major consumer trends when it comes to e-gaming, which is becoming more and more popular. People live streaming their gaming experience, and that is getting very popular for people to watch. If you think a little bit about the future, is there anything that sort of you see that really excites you personally also, as a creative, where you see there's going to be tremendous creative opportunities here to really do something new as a designer?
Yes, I think what is really exciting to me is the level of immersion in games. They really take you on a journey. They take you through the imaginative space, highly emotional. It is fascinating because people, I think, fast forward 100 years from now, are still going to be drawn to those emotional experiences. And that is exciting to me. There are so many interesting challenges and opportunities to design around that. I feel like there is never going to be a point where you can call it done. That is, I think, the source of inspiration.
Yeah, No, absolutely. I think immersion as sort of the overarching topic, I think is sort of like, I think where there's going to be tremendous opportunities. I think what is also interesting, I think, is probably culture. Yeah, I noticed from the automotive space, but also from like maybe home appliances, for example, they're very different, or they're going to be designed for different
Mhm.
markets. How's culture playing into the role into game design? Is that just sort of a big topic, like, where sort of markets and maybe you have to find like different UX UI solutions for different markets? Sometimes, for example, Chinese users are using a product differently than maybe American users. There's maybe a certain expectations in certain markets. Any kind of learnings when it comes to sort of intersection of culture and game design?
Yes, and I think generally speaking, it does vary a little bit. Some of that is dictated by how accessible gaming is.
Hmm.
In countries like South Korea or Japan, it's probably more accessible to everyone than in other countries. In other regions, there is a heavy regulation by government that also informs and influences and shapes the culture itself. There is definitely the regional and cultural aspect, but more so, I think the economical, the economy itself is dictating how accessible the games are. And in some countries, there's a shift towards normalizing games. And obviously, when a country is struggling economically, it's really hard to think about enjoying a game or even buying a game. And so I think that applies to any country that is on the path of that growth. And it's always getting challenged by various factors, whether it being government or religion or economical well-being of the nation.
Yeah, I mean, no, absolutely. Thinking a little bit about sort of the aspect of visual design, right? So, I mean, when you sort of, I think like what I can see also with a lot of games is that when there is a new version out of an like a game, it changes quite a lot visually. But that also becomes very obvious to the user that it's a new version, right? And that
Mhm.
may have some aspect to excitement to it because it feels new again. Is it that an emotional product may need that bigger refreshment after some time to kind of get that, to kind of make the user kind of feel that? Is it about like that positive surprise when the user opens it? Is it about that feeling of newness? Can you talk a little bit about like how do you try to balance? Photoshop is probably the complete opposite of it. If you think of Photoshop interface, which is like very utility driven, where you really try to, where people get upset if you change too much. Actually, in fact, game is
Mhm.
a little bit different. Game interface. Can you talk a little bit about sort of your learnings when it comes to that?
Yes, and I think in many ways that is an exciting part of our job.
Yeah,
Gamers, when they buy the next version of a game, they expect new
new.
and different experience. Obviously, the heart and the soul of that experience remains, somewhat consistent. Gameplay, even though even in that space, there is a ton of innovation that's happening in all genres. But in terms of the interactivity, visual interaction, all of that is something that gamers expect to evolve. They expect to see something
Mhm.
new and different. And when that doesn't happen, we hear it.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Again, similarity with the automotive interface, where also just like the exterior and the interface, the interior of a
Mm-hmm.
vehicle is changing. People in the vehicle basically also you usually have sort of a new version of the sort of
Mm-hmm.
interface there, which is usually also changing. And
Yes,
yeah, I think that's something about designing for emotional interfaces that sort of you want to bring that freshness and people expect it.
for sure. And I want to come back to the cultural attitudes or expectations when designing games, because I think outside of just the external influences of the
Hmm.
government or religion,
Hmm.
There is also the norms. Various cultures identify different numbers as the numbers of misfortune or colors. So that is, of course, the part that we should consider when we design interfaces for various markets. The other example that comes to my mind was the five-fingered characters in Japan. That is a must if you've noticed that. So I think there are many nuances that have to be taken in account, or even the language. What phrases translate well, why it's important to speak to gamers inclusively, because there is at some point there is a moment where a specific phrase doesn't really translate well in other cultures, and this is where we have to be mindful in how our voice and tone changes throughout, and how do we make sure that each audience feels connected through really looking through the experience that knows their attitudes, the norms, and some of the cultural expectations.
100%. And I think that's interesting also, the copy, the text, right? Because again, like with an emotional product like designing for games, you have maybe also a little bit more room for creativity, because you already, in the interface you design, it's about the narrative and about telling a journey. So you may get a bit more creativity also when it comes to how do you execute that with the copy, with the text in the interface. Well, maybe it's a very utility-driven interface. You want to be, very on point, but it's not so much about telling a story or immersing already the user into the story of the game and the whatever the user gonna be basically experienced when they started. That's also a point. It's a good point of view.
Yeah, and I want to add that the challenge in games is that per given second, the gamer needs to make many decisions. And so we also have limited screen estate. We can't speak in paragraphs. In fact, this is what gamers don't want to do when they play games. They didn't come to the game to read walls of text. And so the challenge here is how do you explain things in a very succinct and plain spoken way so they can understand it really quickly and move on? While in the product design, you always have more time. It is largely a static screen, whether it's a mobile screen or web screen, from which you can read the copy. In games, it is the balance we have to strike. How do we communicate what gamers need to know and when they need to know it, but at the same time, without preventing them from the main objective, which is enjoying the play.
100%. And yeah, I think there's a lot of room for creativity. I think the other thing that I think that's interesting is that you design for multiple devices. You already talked about just the screen size you just mentioned. If you design a game, it has to work on multiple platforms, right? It has to work on a computer, it has to work on the television, on a console, right? Like Xbox or PlayStation. Some of them also have to work mobile. All of them are very different when it comes to modality, right? Some you have a mouse and keyboard, some you have a controller. It's very different. And designing for that remote or direct interaction is you're automatically creating different interfaces. Same story again in automotive, where sometimes you're touching things directly, sometimes using remote gesture, and like designing for it, it's influencing the interface design. And it's also a challenge. I mean, I assume, like in your case, is it fair to have someone compete with a certain, like there's also sort of like people use it. I mean, people get better over time with certain things, but there's probably also some learnings in terms of like what works better for someone. You basically have to study the different devices and like how does it work with the game. It's kind of interesting.
Yes, and I think in many ways gamers do have almost like a primary place they go to enjoy. And there's also an intermittent way to engage with the game, whether it being mobile and enhancing your console experience with mobile and vice versa.
Yeah. It's for many people it's a religion, right? If they have a certain way they kind of play games, they like to continue playing these games in that manner. Just as a last question, I mean, we already talked about visual design so much. The fact that it gives game design for games gives so much opportunity for creativity. Where do you draw your inspiration? What inspires you in order to, if you think about the next version of FIFA or the next version of a game, where do you draw your inspiration from to basically unleash that creativity?
That is such a good question. I have to give it a minute. I think there is a motivation to deliver the very best experience to our gamers, period. This is the pursuit and the journey I'm on, as well as many other creatives in the games industry. I think we definitely have the way to get inspired from movies and architecture and other fields that are far distant from the first look from games, and yet they are the source of inspiration for many other areas. There's a lot, and I think the inspiration is also how can we continue enhancing that emotional journey. And I think at the end of the day, whatever it takes, whether it's really over indexing on sound design, haptics, well timed experiences, immersion, immersive UI, the journeys, and all the things that come together. And I think the more I am working on games, the more I see the need for originality. The more I see the need to stop copying other experiences, the more I see the need to innovate. And to innovate, you really don't have much to look around you because everything has become a little bit of a template, and games need something very different.
Yeah. And that makes it exciting as a designer, I think, working on these projects, because there's room for innovation. There's room to think different and to not follow standard templates, but really think about the narrative you want to create. That requires some maturity of designers as well, because, well, you could say only if you know the rules really well, you know when to break them, maybe. Or basically, how can you sort of apply it maybe in a different way, or come up with creative solutions that actually work for the user. So I think that's super interesting. All right, you already talked a little bit about like the team and the different stakeholders that you need to execute a game design when it comes to XUI and the whole multisensory experience. How do you motivate your team when it comes to that, to set a mission and to sort of set a goal and work towards, like you said, creating the best experience possible?
Yes, that is an important part of any company's success, in the people who are working on the experience. And what I find is that talented designers do want to be challenged creatively, and to do that, thinking back, what really comes to my mind is there is a need to be present with them. There is a need to, live by example. There is a need to expose them to your own influence as the manager, as well as your failures, and, let them see that you recover and you get back to the game. I also think there is nothing more demotivating than the manager that does not have the strategy, that does not have a plan. And in many ways, they also need, designers need someone to cheer them up for the new success and new accomplishment happens. That way, being engaged, there is nothing else that works best in my experience. It's the manager that is there with you, for you, because at the end of the day, we are in it together. And we're better together, we're more creative together, and I think we're also more fulfilled together. So that is the sense of community and creative challenge that really produces the best results.
Yeah, it's a team sport, just like FIFA is as well, where it's about putting together a team, and you need the striker, you need the defender, you need the person, the goalkeeper, and you need, and it's one person's not going to do it themselves, and I think it's very similar to the game you actually design in your day to day, and you're responsible for.
Absolutely. And,
Yeah.
and I also think that it's not enough to be talented. You really need to also work hard. But looking back at my journey, you also need a good manager and people around you that can help you to get through this journey. That is what I want them to focus on, producing really good work, less of overcoming unfair obstacles and things that have, impacted many people's journeys.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the importance of mentorship is, I think, it's mentorship is critical, I think, to the development of designers and to keep them motivated and keep them evolving. If people don't have a mentor, I think I can definitely recommend it to for designers to find a mentor, like a more senior designer, a more maybe the actual department lead, like in your case, to be the mentor and kind of grow. And I think it's key.
I think mentorship happens everywhere. And I happen to arrive to, a thinking that the inspiration and the mentorship is all around us. And there are many people at work or in the past that have been my mentors without realizing that they have been my mentors, because there's some things that they did really well. And I saw how well it works. And I saw how productive that is. And I made a note for myself. I also think it's important to be approaching the mentorship with caution. If there is someone who's willing to offer mentorship upfront so willingly, to me, that is a little bit of a red flag, because what I believe, people who probably should mentor, they often don't have time. And people who aren't necessarily are going to bring you value as a mentor probably tend to offer the mentorship up front a little bit too often. And I think it's about the balance between what are the things that you think you need to learn, and what are the things that you need to look for in other places. Maybe it's people, maybe it's books, maybe it's movies, maybe it's learning another subject. Really, really soaking in the knowledge from everywhere.
No, 100%. I mean, it's about education in the end, right? And you can get it at so many places, and different people can be for you a role model in different things, and it's not maybe about the whole person at large, but about different things, like you say. I remember myself, I when I in the past, also my past roles, there was, for example, if someone was really good at presentation, really good at selling a design, right? I was just listening and trying to understand like how the person did it and what can I learn from it. And that's a way of mentoring, like you said, and you can pick it also yourself and decide from whom do you want to learn it. I think the other thing is then, if you sort of have a motivated team and you march towards a certain direction, I think one of the kind of topics always for designers, and it's been sort of an ongoing topic in this podcast, Design Drives at large. How do you frame design towards business stakeholders? How do you, and specifically now in your context, game design, right? So how do business stakeholders understand the value of the business value of having a good user experience design, user interface design when it comes to games?
Yes, and what helped me is connecting through the insights, through data, through research, because between those tools, the data and the insights, you can almost precisely translate the emotion into a pragmatic value. I also know that business stakeholders are very competitive. They want to be the best. And so when the depth in the strategy comes in the form of a well planned and thorough design, they will offer support. They will see the value. I enjoy working with business stakeholders in many ways. The connecting the creative and strategic part of design is the highlight. People respond to a deep and thoughtful strategy really well, whether it being stakeholder on the business side or design. Everybody can see the depth.
100%. And the best thing is if your your design aligns with sort of the business, right? And you can sort of like argue that in the right way. I had many episodes on this on the podcast. It's a language in the end. Learning the language of businesses, and understanding how do you need to communicate design. It's you're using different words than, well, I'm doing it because it's more pretty, but you're kind of trying to think about, like, what does that mean, right? And what's the value of that actually, and to try to speak it in a different language. And I think
I think it also is important to align and join the organization that is on the same path with you as a leader.
Yeah.
And I think many of us have the learnings in the past. Many years ago, I was working at the company. The company was quite successful. They've been in the business for quite some time. And it was more of an old school approach, very careful, steady, and something in my mind I couldn't settle. Something didn't feel right. I knew that we need to elevate the design, the experience itself, if we want to continue being competitive. But for many reasons, I have let myself get convinced by the state of mindset in that company that it's okay as is. And fast forward a couple of years, there's a competitor that comes out with highly emotional, highly usable experience that wasn't taken seriously up front. And yet it cost the market share to the business. And I think coming out of that experience, I have made the promise to myself to always stand by meaningful innovation and change, as uncomfortable as it might be, as challenging as it might be, and really doing the homework, showing how this new strategy could be translated to a beautiful, emotional design that is also lasting. That is the competitive advantage, because at some point everybody can nail down the convention and it's more about who can ship things faster. But there is something at the core of the experience that is the key for the user and the business.
100%. I think it's like just because maybe things going well doesn't mean things could be even better, and maybe your strategy may still be there's still open for innovation. There's always open, and like having that openness to innovation, even though you should be. I mean, there's a saying like be better. It's better be the person to disrupt yourself than the other company to disrupt you, right? And that reflect like a level of sort of open-mindedness, right? I mean, to rethink what we have been doing, and sort of maybe the assumptions we have, are they still correct, right? Is there room for innovation in areas where we may have not thought about, and keeping that open-mindedness and sort of that ability to constantly shape. A lot of businesses lose that over some time. This was a topic in just one of the last episodes, that many organizations, they're very creative in the beginning, and then they turn into sales companies, right? And they lose the ability to shape, to create, and to innovate. And this is so important to keep that. Nowadays, specifically with uncertain environments we are in, both economics, political and environmental, having that openness for innovation, I think is key to survival of any business.
Absolutely. And in many ways, even the way I build teams, it's the team that can do not just the work of today, but actually the work of tomorrow, the skill set, the ability to introduce a new convention, being unbound by old ways of doing things. That is, in fact, I think, the strength that we can bring to the organization. That is the challenge and the exciting part of my job as well.
To build
and
a
I
team.
think, so you got to be comfortable with innovation. And I respect the journey of optimization. That is a big part of any business. But at the same time, you just can't A/B test your way into greatness. You can't. You have to have the vision first.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's really where the designer come into place to materialize the abstract, materialize that vision, and working that out in a co-creative process with different stakeholders to create shared ownership. So I think I totally agree that. So I think Liliia, it was really amazing to hear from you and all of the insights. We're reaching here the top of the hour. Before we end, I have one more question to you. You have to tell that to the audience. What is your FIFA team you usually pick?
My FIFA team, I really enjoy playing squad battles. I really enjoy playing Volta. That gives you a snappy feeling, a very different football feeling. I love the strategic component of career. And between the three spaces, it's really hard to say which team I choose for FIFA. I guess I love to play a lot of different ways. Yes.
Playing different teams. Yeah.
Yes.
In my case, it used to be always Chelsea. I was always going Chelsea because they had Didier Drogba in the front, and Didier Drogba was hard to beat as a striker in the game. I tell
you what. When I joined FIFA, of course, I grew up hearing and watching the legends. Many of us have seen before, but stepping into this very unique world of football, I have made the decision to cheer for female teams, women in football, and the United States football team. And Alex Morgan has been a little bit of heroes of mine. So that is my team.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, that's a good point. All right, Liliia, thank you so much for taking the time here chatting on the episode. I think you brought tremendous value here to the audience. So we're just on behalf of the audience, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
All right, that was the episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments about your thoughts and biggest learnings from the episode. I'm always super curious about that. You can also tag me in a post about your biggest takeaway and share your insights with others to pass on your learnings. If the episode provided you a lot of value, make sure to follow, subscribe, and share it with friends and colleagues so they also have the chance to learn and grow. Until next time, cheers.